Hello and welcome to Policy Forum Pod, the podcast for those who want to dig a little bit deeper into the public policy challenges facing the Asia-Pacific region. I'm Martin Pearce.
And I'm Sharon Bessel.
Thanks for joining us again. Today we are going to be taking a close look at a small country on the other side of the world that has had a huge impact. It's had a huge impact in terms of the way that it responded to the global financial crisis. It's had a huge impact in terms of the way it has thought about some of the big political and social issues of our time. That country is Iceland, and talking to us about Iceland is Kristín Vala Ragnarsdottir, who is a professor of sustainability science at the University of Iceland, as well as a distinguished fellow at the Schumacher Institute in the United Kingdom.
Martin, I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Vala. She's trained as a geologist, but her passion is sustainability, and she spent a long part of her career thinking very deeply about issues of economic sustainability, environmental sustainability and human well-being, and she has some really new and exciting ideas to bring to these debates. She's also been involved in politics in Iceland. She became politically active after the economic collapse in 2008, and she's been a member of, or she is a member of, the Pirate Party. So who wouldn't be excited about talking to a bona fide pirate?
A bona fide pirate, indeed. You know, International Talk Like a Pirate Day is sometime in September. It's a shame we didn't have her around for this, but, I'm sure if she was here for International Pirate Day, I would make some embarrassing attempt to talk like a pirate.
We could always bring her back in September.
Yeah. let's try and avoid me talking like a pirate if we possibly can. So before we hand over to Vala and hear what she had to say, a quick reminder that we do want to get your feedback and thoughts about what we talk about on the pod. We are really interested in that. You can reach us on Twitter, where we are at Policy Forum, or you can find us on Facebook, where we are Asia Pacific Policy Society. Of course, you can always check our website, policyforum.net, for all of the latest insights, analysis and debate on the public policy challenges facing the Asia Pacific region. Now let's hear what Vala had to say. Kristín Vala Ragnarsdottir, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Vala, I wanted to start today's discussion at a personal level, if I may. In the past, you've been involved with anti-establishment politics. You're a member of the Pirate Party in Iceland and you stood for election, albeit unsuccessfully. Could you tell us a little bit about the Pirate Party of Iceland? What does the party believe in and what attracted you to their cause?
After the economic collapse in 2008, a left government was formulated in 2009 and some citizen parties were formulated that got a few members of parliament. When the government collapsed in 2013, then some of the people from these citizen parties came together to formulate the Pirate Party, which is an international organization. And in those elections in 2013, 3 members of parliament were elected in, and then our prime minister was found out to have been in the Panama Papers, so there were new elections in 2016, where 10 members of the pirates got into parliament. And then we had another government collapse in 2016. And then there were new elections and 7 members of the pirates got in. So now we have 7 members of the Pirate Party in parliament. They very much stand for transparency and anti-corruption. And they have formulated close to 200 policies, which are all formulated by the grassroots and available on the internet. And the parliamentarians listen carefully to the grassroots. And for example, at the moment, one of the members of parliament is going after the spending of parliamentarians for travel, which has not been transparent. And we have found out that they are getting huge amounts of funding for traveling within their own constituencies, and it's not clear that this is all for their parliamentarian work. And this very much irritates the powers to be. In Parliament, they have come up with various policies. For example, at the moment, they are pursuing a policy on basic universal income, which we are hoping will be accepted. There is a pirate who leads the welfare committee and is very much interested in changing the way we are dealing with people who are handicapped, who are unemployed, and so on. So I think the pirate, from my perspective, have been a very good and positive influence, and they dare to stand up when things are looking sort of suspicious
and
within the government.
On a personal level, what attracted you to their cause?
I actually remember the day I became a pirate, and that was when the left Green then minister in 2013, just when Parliament was collapsing, formulated a policy to get funding for setting up a heavy industry in his constituency, where the foreign industry coming in, which needed a high amount of energy for its operations, got a lot of tax deductions, etc. Funding was put in to build roads and a harbour and so on. And I thought, he's from the Green Party and this is what he is promoting. So I thought, I can't vote for this party anymore. So I became a pirate. And I've been working with them very much standing for Parliament, although I have been too far back on the list to be voted into Parliament. But it has been a very interesting time for me, because these are mostly young people. They're full of enthusiasm. They're full of ideas. They want a different future than what the government seems to be aiming for. So I feel very privileged to have had the opportunity to work with them.
Vala, you mentioned the 200 or more policies that the Pirate Party has developed in Iceland. And as part of that, you made a reference to universal basic income, and that's an issue that we've discussed on the podcast in the past. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts about that. There's certainly a very strong view in some quarters that this is a disincentive to work, but the experiments coming out of Finland, or the evidence coming out of Finland, is suggesting the opposite, that actually it opens up opportunities, it fosters entrepreneurialism. What are your thoughts about universal basic income?
Well, the proposals of the pirate is that we look very carefully into the outcome of the experiments that are going on, like in Holland and in Finland and some states in the US. They have actually started this in India. So there are examples that we can learn from, and if it becomes or gives a positive outcome, then the Pirate Party is very much in for putting in universal basic income, which will then replace unemployment payments to the handicapped and others which are not payments to the elderly who do not have an adequate pension system and so on. And now that we are talking about increased automation and all these jobs are going to be lost and so on, and those of us who are working, we are not working 7 or 8 hours a day. Many of us are working much longer hours. So people are getting tired and irritable and don't have any time for their families and so on. So I think this is a great idea to give people the opportunity, if they do not want to work full time, the opportunity to work perhaps part time and then have time for other pursuits, have time for your children, or for your gardening, or for your meditation, or whatever strikes you that you would like to do to sort of further your personal development. And so I'm all for it.
So the kind of model that is being considered by the Pirate Party in Iceland would see the sort of rolling back of certain elements of the social welfare system? Is that
yes,
is that
it would be to integrate it with the social welfare system. And the proposal that has been put forward in Parliament is It was done by a woman called Halldóra Mogensen, and she is now the chairman of the Welfare Committee of Parliament.
So Vala, you've told us a little bit about the turbulent politics that Iceland experienced after the global financial crisis, and we know that the crisis was particularly devastating for Iceland. Standing on the outside, it looks as though Iceland has made a fairly miraculous recovery, despite the turbulence of politics and the issues that you raise about environmental and development issues. But can you tell us a little bit about how Iceland managed to recover, or whether indeed it has recovered in the way we assume it has when we're standing a long way away?
Well, what was done by the new left-wing government that came in 2009 was to make a new position for a special investigator to actually investigate financial fraud. We also got the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, very much to come to Iceland and breathe down our neck. So how the government could operate was very much limited by that. The economy in Iceland has recovered now, but it's primarily because of tourism. I'll go into that in a minute. When the economy collapsed, the currency completely collapsed. It was completely worthless. And it's not publicly known, but without the Norwegian politicians and Norwegian National Bank, we would still not be able to exchange our krona. So Norway stepped in straight away and said, we will make sure that, imports of food, etc., will be paid for. Norway will guarantee all payments and so on. The special prosecutor has, with his staff, and the office was big, it had 70 or 80 people. We got the assistant of Eva Joly, who had been investigating financial corruption both in France and in Norway, because it's difficult to recognize these white-collar criminals. She knew exactly how they operated, and that was very helpful. Now, almost 30 banksters have gone to prison. Some have finished their sentences, others are in prison or are waiting for space to go to prison. But what they had managed to do, many of them, was to hide money in tax havens. And now this money is coming back to Iceland through the back door and taking part in all sorts of investments, and actually get a discount of the Icelandic krona through the National Bank, which is what a lot of people are very unhappy about. Many people lost their homes. Thousands of people emigrated, mostly to Norway and Denmark. But what the initial government, the left-wing government in 2009 did was to start an advertising campaign for tourism, and which has now been incredibly successful. And Iceland seems to be on the agenda of people much more than before. Even China has discovered Iceland. So last year we had 2.5 million tourists, and we are a country of 320,000 people, so that's a huge influx of tourists. We had something like 400,000 or 500,000, before this big advertisement started. And the infrastructure isn't really there to support this. So our roads are crumbling, the setup for toilets, etc., by the most popular places is behind, and so on. So the only reason why we can boost and be proud of economic growth is because of the tourism.
The global financial crisis seemed to be the catalyst for the rise of a lot of anti-establishment politics around the world. I mean, it's not just the Pirate Party in Iceland, but I'm also thinking of the Occupy movement. And on the right side of politics, it could be argued that a lot of the anti-establishment anger we saw in the rise of Donald Trump was fueled by economic pain. Do you think these types of anti-establishment sentiments point towards a sort of wider dissatisfaction with the status quo around the world, with our political leaders and with how the global economy works?
Yes, I think a lot of people have realized that the financial system is not working for the middleman. We now have globally, I think it's 6 individuals that own as much wealth as half of the poorer part of the population on Earth. So, and it was a few hundred people who owned that much a few years ago, and this is put together by Oxfam every year. And then this year it's 6 people. So with the huge amount of debt that people have accumulated, the rich people, you know, there are like Amazons of funds flowing to the rich people, which is making, you know, fewer and fewer rich and more people financially struggling. So they may be unemployed or they may have low pay, so they do not pay any high taxes. So it's now the middle class which is being squeezed to keep the system together, because the rich people are hiding their money, their wealth in tax havens.
So going back to the question, what's your take on the sort of global appetite for change that we've seen that's kind of fueled the rise of the sort of anti-establishment politics?
I actually think it's very healthy, and you know, like the success of the anti-establishment party in Italy recently is something that I think we should note. They have been painted very badly by the sort of regular media, but if you look into the people they have in that party, they actually somebody that I know and some of my colleagues here know very well. It was voted in for a poor community in Rome. He's called Lorenzo Fioramonti, and if this party gets into government, then he will be the financial minister, and he is a political economist, and so he would be promoting very much a different economic path than what has been seen in Italy, which of course is known for a lot of corruption and so on.
Some of these issues are quite specific to countries, but many of them are really global issues. And globally, we've seen the emergence or the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. And that's something that you've done a lot of work around, particularly in terms of thinking about the alternative frameworks that might give us a means of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and also thinking quite differently about policy so that we have a better balance between the social, the environmental and the economic, both globally and locally. How do you see the Sustainable Development Goals fitting into this rise of concern that we see globally? Do you see that they genuinely provide a new pathway forward?
Well, the Sustainable Development Goals very much indicate that people see the need for a different development path, because the goals are 17. They do not only focus on the developing world, but on the developed world. They focus on environmental protection, and they focus on societal justice, eradicating inequality and poverty and so on. So this is definitely a very different development path which is being promoted. However, most of the world's governments are still focusing on economic growth. And what underpins economic growth is the use of natural resources. And we have now reached the time of peak production of many resources, and oil is amongst those. That means we still have half left, but we can only burn about 20% of the fossil fuels we have left in the ground if we want to stay below 2 degrees. What I think is absolutely crucial in this respect is to stop only focusing on economic growth. We have to look at other issues that are important to measure. You know, what is the health of our ecosystems? What is the health of our social systems? How are these issues linked? How can we live within the boundaries that our one planet gives us. Because if we continue with the economic growth path, we will follow the scenario of business as usual, which was put forward in a system dynamics model by Meadows et al. In 1972 under the title of Limits to Growth. And there is an Australian researcher who has recently investigated which path have we been on since 1972, and sure enough, we have been on the path of business as usual. And this means that we are coming to a peak of natural resources that can fuel this economic growth, and we will have societal decline because of pollution and resource depletion.
So what kind of economic model would you like to see in place, Vala?
Well, one economic model is something that I have been working on with people from here, Bob Costanza and Aida Kupisevsky, and people from all over the world. We were invited to work with the Bhutanese government to put together a new thinking based on gross national happiness, and that is very much based on ecological economics, where we do not only look at financial capital, but we look at ecological services as part of the natural capital and social capital. And putting that together, we can promote an indicator which sort of integrates the health of our ecosystems and the well-being or the happiness or welfare of the people, and the genuine progress that we are following, not just financial flow increase like GDP, but an indicator which is called GPI, or the genuine progress indicators, which then starts with GDP but then adds in what's good, like voluntary work and bringing up children and so on, and takes away what is bad, like environmental pollution and so on. If we did that, then we are much likely to stay within the limits of the planet that we have. And actually, we need to start focusing on this very soon, because we are the sort of window of opportunity to change the path is getting narrower and narrower. And there are people thinking about these issues all over the place. And what I have been doing here is to sort of, with Ida and Bob, be looking at the different new economic frameworks. That is the donuts economics, which came originally from Oxfam, and Kate Raworth has just written a book about that. You know, how do we stay within the ecological ceiling of the planet, but still build a social foundation for a prosperous life for everybody. There is the regenerative economy that comes from John Fullerton, who is a former banker who has seen the light that we need to do things differently. And he's very much focusing on changing financial flow to go into something that is good both for nature and for communities. There is an interesting thinking from Thailand, and I just spent some time there before I came to Australia, which is called the sufficiency economy. And the thinking behind that was developed by their late king, who reigned for over 70 years and tirelessly worked on development programs around his country. And it's very much built on using together wisdom and knowledge, and from that gain thinking of that the middle way is good, you know, not too much and not too little. And that way get a balance in economic and environment and cultural and capital. And then there are many others. So it's very interesting to see that there are, you know, people around the world who are saying, hey, we need to change our path. But I think the only way to change government is to educate them properly.
So there's obviously a lot of different models that you've talked about there, Vala. If you could wave a magic wand or a pirate's cutlass or whatever it is and implement one of those systems, which would you move to?
Well, I've invested quite a lot of energy into the well-being economy, but I've just recently discovered the wisdom economies, which comes out of the thinking of Ken Wilber. And in that, what they do is to put together not only social, environmental, and financial or economic capital, but actually 10 different capitals, which then includes spirituality and knowledge and health and so on. And by doing that, you can have, if people are become aware of this and can train in thinking about all of these different widths, then you can have more impact. And basically the what Sean Esbjørn Hargrave, who is behind this, says you can achieve with that is then not only triple bottle line, which is profit, planet, purpose, people, profit, planet, but we can have a quadruple bottom line, which is people, profit, planet, and purpose. So people actually do have to have a purpose in order to achieve these goals. And I think this is something that I and my colleagues need to at least consider. Is are we only thinking about issues that can have a certain impact? Are we leaving out other issues that would help everybody achieve higher impact?
So Vala, what you're talking about really is an incredible transformation to the way the world is organised, essentially, where we really rethink our approach. And that's a long-term goal. But as you've also pointed out, the need for change is now. We have these gross increases in inequality, gross environmental degradation. What would you like to see happen immediately? What are the first steps that we need to take to rein things back in or to transform the way we approach the world?
I think education is crucial. That doesn't mean that we should throw all the responsibility on our children, but we do need, if people who go into politics are unaware of all of these issues, then we will have bad policies. And students around the world actually have discovered that the curricula of their economics degree hasn't changed since before the economic crash, and they are demanding change. So it's very much being driven by students that curricula are now being changed and becoming more pluralistic. Unfortunately, most politicians seem to be lawyers, so we need to educate the lawyers. We need to educate everybody about how the world economy works. And I must say, I'm actually a geologist, and when I studied geology, I learned how natural resources form, and I can tell you how much there is, but I didn't learn any economics. And same for the economists; they learn some fictional models, which are supposed to boom and bust regularly, and they don't understand why. But they didn't learn anything about natural resources. So we need to take education out of the silos and have a more holistic education. And actually, if I had the magic wand, of a pirate or a world guru, I would make every parliament and government sit down and learn about new economics. Because I think the most pressing thing is that if we don't want to steer the world to 4 or 5 degrees in terms of heating, then we need to change the economy.
Finally, Vala, you talked about young people a couple of times there, and it seems clear that you think that the next generation will be the ones to really lead change. Are you optimistic that that change can actually happen, the kind of significant change that we've talked about today?
Yes, I would say that, since I started thinking about sustainability issues, and that's now almost 20 years, I have seen a big change in the mindset of the young people. What I see in my students is that they don't necessarily want to have a big house or a big car. They're happy to bicycle or take the bus, but they want to have access to land so that they can grow some of their food, and they want to have experiences instead of property and so on. So there is a change in thinking. Not all of them, but actually in the sort of the majority of the students that I am teaching, I can see this change, and I think that's very, very hopeful. The young people often give me hope.
I'm conscious of the fact that certainly in Australia, but in many countries, politics is dominated by older people, often by older men, and as you say, who've been educated in a particular way and have often had a career in politics. How can we start to open up the spaces for young people, including those who are not yet old enough to vote, to start to influence the agenda, to start to be able to engage in change?
I think it's by giving young people a platform. The universities should help in formulating some sort of a bridge so that the students can go over and talk to the politicians. For example, in terms of an alliance of countries that do want to think about new economics that is called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and comes out of the work that I and others have been doing on the wellbeing economy. That includes countries like Scotland and Sweden and Slovenia and New Zealand and Costa Rica. They were the first countries to join up. That was last year. Now there will be a new meeting this autumn, and there Finland will join, Wales will join, maybe Iceland, I'm hoping at least, maybe Thailand, because I did talk to high-level people there, but there doesn't seem to be any indication that Australia will join this alliance. How can we make that happen? Do we have to wait for a new government, or can this current government be reached and somebody say, hey, we need something different? I don't know. I don't know enough about politics, but it seems to me that if a big country like Australia would join this alliance, that would make a huge difference.
Wonderful. Well, Kristín Vala Ragnarsdottir, it's been fascinating talking with you about some of these issues, and thanks for teasing some of this stuff out. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you.
Well, how about that? That was a fascinating interview. And again, many thanks to Vala for her time. So I've still got Sharon with me. Sharon, what did you make of that? What were your sort of key observations? We covered a lot of territory with Vala there.
We certainly did. It was a terrific conversation. And I love the way Vala brings that combination of someone who's been engaged in practical politics as well as very deep thinking around these issues. And the agenda that she maps out is a huge one. But when you hear her talking about what we need to do to address global inequality, to address environmental degradation, to take on some of these really big problems, you don't feel overwhelmed because she does map out that pathway forward. And I think that's a really positive thing, that she's presenting genuine alternatives.
Anything else really stand out for you there, Sharon?
For me, one of the really powerful messages from Vala was the importance of education. And I think in Australia, we often do find ourselves in a situation where education isn't as well valued as it should be. But Vala's broader point about the importance of a broad-based education that crosses silos, crosses disciplines, and is really focused on analytic skills, on critical thinking. That's so crucial to addressing some of the challenges that the world faces today. So I think that message that she has about the importance of education and the importance of educating our current political leaders beyond the silos that they often sit in, so that they can see new pathways forward and different alternatives in the way we develop and implement policy. I think that's a really important message from Vala.
And what about that call for sort of call to arms, call to action from young people? That was pretty important as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic to hear her talking about the importance of creating spaces for young people to both move into politics but also to influence the agenda. And she talked, really powerfully about the importance of engaging students and the role of universities in engaging students and creating that bridge between students and politics. And, Martin, I'd push that even further. I'd say we need to create spaces for younger people, those people who don't yet have the right to vote, but whose futures are dependent on what we do with the world today, but who also often have some really important and new thinking to bring to these challenges. So but I would be saying, how do we open the spaces even further to allow teenagers to be really genuinely engaging in these policy debates that they're so often very passionate about?
What might that actually mean in practice?
Well, there are some really interesting models in other parts of the world. And it struck me when Vala was talking about some of the countries that have engaged proactively around ideas of a new economy. Slovenia, for example, Wales. These are countries that have in place children's parliaments. Now, this might be just a coincidence, but I think it also shows some of the progressive thinking that's going on in some places. Children's parliaments, not just as a means of creating future citizens, but as a means of creating a way for children to genuinely engage in policy debates and to feed into the decisions that are made in adult parliaments, I think are a really great model for thinking about how we democratise democracy.
Now, something like that, of course, would not just get an input from children and young people into politics and policy thinking, but it might also create some pathways for those young people to think about going into politics. And one of the things that struck me from some of the things that Vala was talking about there was, if you're not creating those pathways, you're potentially drawing from a smaller pool of people, young people, who might be drawn into politics.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think in many parts of the world, including Australia, one of the challenges is that parliamentarians often come from a very similar background. And of course, we're seeing challenges to that with the election of independents or minority parties. But often, in the major parties, people are drawn from very similar backgrounds, often a background in law, often men from a particular background. And I think that lack of diversity is really problematic. So the more pathways that can be created for people to engage in politics, and also to come and go in politics, not to move into politics and then stay in politics as a career, but actually come and go so there's a wealth of experience being brought to political debate, is really important.
That would be a very significant change, I think. Well, it really was a fascinating discussion. Don't forget, we want to hear your views on what we've talked about today. You can reach us on Twitter at Apps Policy Forum. You can find us on Facebook, where we are Asia Pacific Policy Society. And this podcast is, of course, available wherever you get your podcasts, including, as we mentioned before, Spotify. Very exciting. You can find us on there and you can follow us on there. So we will be back soon with another podcast. Until then, keep an eye on our website, policyforum.net, where we cover off all of the crucial issues affecting Asia-Pacific public policy. We'll be back soon with another podcast, but until then, from me, Martin Pearce, cheerio.
And from me, Sharon Bessel, goodbye.